A teenage boy walks into a luxury jewelry store, heart full of love, ready to buy a birthday gift for his little sister. But within minutes, that quiet act of kindness turns into a public accusation. He's trying to steal, the store manager screams. Police are called, weapons are drawn, and before he can even speak, he's labeled a criminal. What no one in that store realizes is that this boy isn't just anybody. His father is one of the most powerful men in the U.S. military. And when he shows up, everything changes. This is the true story of a silver bracelet, a lie exposed, and a confrontation that sparked a national reckoning. If you're ready to witness how truth fights back against injustice, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What would you do if the world didn't wait to hear your side of the story? Let's get into it. The bell above the door jingled softly as 17-year-old Caleb Johnson stepped into Silverline Jewelers, a luxury boutique nestled between towering buildings in downtown Lexington, Kentucky. The store smelled like polished mahogany, high-end perfume, and quiet judgment. Caleb had imagined this moment for months, saving every penny he could from his part-time job at Maple Street Cafe, working after school and on weekends, just to be here today. He had done everything right. He had shown up early to his shifts, wiped tables until they gleamed, brewed espressos until his hands memorized the rhythm. He had resisted temptations to spend even a dime on snacks or games. Every dollar he earned went into a savings jar he kept hidden beneath his bed. Today, that jar had become his ticket, and all he wanted was to buy something beautiful for his younger sister Alana, who was turning 14 the next day. Alana wasn't just a sibling. She was his best friend, the person who waited up for him after closing shifts, who cheered him on through finals, who wore hand-me-downs without complaint. Caleb wanted to give her something real, something new, something that sparkled the way her eyes did when she laughed. He spotted the bracelet the moment he entered. It sat behind a thick pane of glass, looped around a white velvet cushion, a delicate silver chain inlaid with tiny opals, Alana's birthstone. It looked like it belonged in a glass case, but Caleb wanted it to belong on her wrist. He stepped toward the display, heart fluttering with nerves and excitement, unaware that behind the counter, someone else had taken notice of him. From the far side of the showroom, Carolyn Whitaker, the manager on duty, lifted her gaze. A woman in her mid-50s, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and a lavender scarf around her neck. Carolyn was the type who prided herself on knowing her clientele before they even spoke. And in her mind, Caleb didn't fit. Her eyes scanned him. Hoodie, faded jeans, scuffed sneakers. No visible labels. No Rolex. No scent of aftershave from a luxury department store. Just a teenage black boy walking into a place where bracelets cost more than his monthly paycheck. To her, he wasn't a customer. He was a warning bell. Caleb, oblivious to the silent verdict forming behind the counter, cleared his throat and gently tapped the glass above the bracelet. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "Could I take a look at this one?" Carolyn didn't move right away. Her fingers paused mid-keystroke on the register. She slowly turned her head and walked over, her heels clicking sharply against the polished wood floor. "This one?" she asked, nodding toward the bracelet without smiling. "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said, pulling out his wallet. "I've saved up. It's for my sister's birthday." The wallet opened slowly, deliberately. Caleb had practiced this gesture, aware of how easily his every movement could be misread. Inside were crisp bills, mostly tens and fives, carefully stacked. Carolyn's lips pursed as she eyed the cash. "That's quite a bit of money," she said, voice tight. "Yes, ma'am. I work at Maple Street Cafe. Been saving since October," Caleb explained, his smile proud and genuine. But pride was not what Carolyn saw. What she saw was a story she had already written. A teenage boy, hoodie slightly unzipped, cash heavy, unaccompanied. Suspicious. She crossed her arms. "Are you sure you can afford this?" she asked, eyebrows raised. The words hit him like a slap. Not because of their content, he had heard worse, but because of the way she said it. Not as a helpful check-in. Not as a question. As a judgment. "Yes," Caleb replied steadily, refusing to flinch. "I counted it last night. It's exactly $239. Carolyn didn't reach for the key to open the display. Instead, she tilted her head and offered a smile that was anything but warm. "And where did this money come from?" she asked. Caleb blinked, his heart skipping a beat. "From my job. I work after school." "Oh." Carolyn cut him off, still not opening the case. Does the cafe pay that well? The implication hung in the air like smoke. She didn't believe him. It didn't matter how neat his bills were or how respectful his tone. She had already made her decision. I'd like to see the bracelet, Caleb repeated, his voice firmer now. Carolyn sighed an exaggerated, theatrical breath and finally turned toward the counter. She pulled the key from her lanyard and unlocked the glass with deliberate slowness. With the precision of a museum curator, she lifted the bracelet and placed it on the counter in front of him. But before pulling her hands away, she looked him square in the eye and said, "Be careful. That bracelet costs more than some people's rent." It wasn't just condescension. It was a challenge, as if she were daring him to mess up. Caleb nodded, silently gripping the sides of his wallet harder to ground himself. He picked up the bracelet with trembling fingers, the metal cool to the touch. He turned it slightly in the light, admiring the subtle gleam of the opals. But then, it happened. The bracelet slipped. Maybe it was sweat on his fingers. Maybe it was the weight of the moment. Maybe it was just gravity and bad luck. Either way, it dropped. A tiny clink as it bounced off the counter. A sharper clatter as it struck the tile floor. Silence. Carolyn gasped theatrically. "I knew it," she said, her voice rising into a shriek. "You were trying to steal it." Caleb's eyes widened. "What?" "No, it slipped." But Carolyn was already lunging for the phone. Her finger stabbed the emergency speed dial like she'd done it a dozen times. "I have a thief in the store," she said into the receiver. "Black teenager. Hoodie. Trying to flee with merchandise." Caleb was frozen. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew what came next. The sirens. The stairs. The assumption of guilt. The invisible shift in air pressure that occurs when you go from being a person to being a suspect. He took a step back, hands in clear view. "I didn't do anything," he said aloud, as if declaring it would change what people saw when they looked at him. But they had already decided. A couple browsing rings looked up sharply, the woman clutching her purse closer. An older man near the watches gave Caleb a long, disapproving stare and shook his head. A soft wail rose in the distance. Police sirens. The sound grew louder, bouncing off glass storefronts and marble floors. Carolyn stood triumphant, as if her alarm had summoned justice. Caleb's heart pounded. He turned, not to run, but to breathe to calm the thunder in his chest. And that's when he remembered. He wasn't alone. His fingers moved quickly, pulling out his phone. He didn't dial 911. He didn't call a lawyer. He called his father. "Dad?" he whispered, keeping his voice level. "I need you to come to Silverline Jewelers. Right now." The line was silent for a second. Then came the voice, calm, deep, commanding. "I'm on my way." Caleb hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. He took a deep breath. The sirens were just outside now. Inside the store, Carolyn stood near the counter like a hero waiting for her medal. But Caleb stood still. Not defensive, not apologetic, just steady. Because what Carolyn didn't know was that the man she had just set up for humiliation wasn't just any teenager. He was the son of Commander Elias Johnson, one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. Navy and head of Joint Military Operations in Kentucky. And within minutes, everything in that store was about to change. The sirens blared outside as the glass doors of Silverline Jewelers swung open with force. 2 Lexington Police Department officers stepped in, one older, bulkier, with a buzz cut and square jaw that made him look like a man used to giving orders. That was Sergeant Rick Dalton. Right behind him, a younger officer, a little slimmer, with more observant eyes, scanned the scene. That was Officer Kyle Reese. Carolyn Whitaker immediately raised a trembling hand. "There," she shouted, pointing directly at Caleb. "That's him." He tried to slip the bracelet into his pocket. "I saw it with my own eyes." Sergeant Dalton didn't hesitate. He marched toward Caleb like a hammer looking for a nail. "Hands up," he barked. Caleb complied without a word. His hands rose slowly, palms open. The bracelet still lay on the floor by his feet, untouched. "I didn't take anything," Caleb said, his voice calm, but shaking underneath. "It slipped. That's all." Dalton didn't care. He reached for the handcuffs at his belt, the metal clicking ominously as he prepared to slap them on. Reese hesitated, eyes narrowing. His gaze flicked from Caleb to Carolyn, then to the bracelet still lying exactly where it fell. Something about this didn't sit right with him. "Sergeant," Reese said softly, "shouldn't we?" "Stay behind me," Dalton snapped. "We're handling this." Carolyn chimed in again, voice shrill with righteous indignation. He was about to bolt. I turned around for 1 second, and when I looked back, the bracelet was gone. It was in his hand. He was trying to pocket it. Caleb opened his mouth to protest again, but Dalton was already moving in. He grabbed Caleb's arm and spun him around. I said, "Don't move." Caleb stiffened. His breath caught in his chest. He didn't resist. He knew better than to make sudden moves. But Officer Reese stepped forward now, his voice firmer. "Hold on. The bracelet's still on the ground. Untouched. Right there." Dalton paused, his hand still holding the cuffs, midair. Carolyn's tone shifted, sensing the moment slipping. He dropped it. When he saw me watching, he panicked and dropped it. Caleb turned his head slightly, keeping his tone even. I didn't panic. It slipped. I tried to catch it. That's all. Dalton studied him for a second, then scoffed. "I'm not here to listen to excuses." But Reese knelt down beside the bracelet and examined it. "It's not damaged," he said aloud. "No sign of force. No fingerprints on the glass counter. And no surveillance check." Carolyn rolled her eyes. "I don't need surveillance. I was watching him." Dalton huffed, tightening his grip on Caleb's wrist. "A manager's word is enough probable cause." At that exact moment, the store's energy shifted. The door opened again, this time quietly. No sirens, no stomping boots. Commander Elias Johnson stepped in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He didn't have a badge on his chest, but the authority in his bearing filled the room. His Navy uniform was absent. Today he wore a plain navy polo shirt, jeans, and a calm that felt more dangerous than anger. Carolyn turned to look and blanched. Dalton didn't notice him immediately, but Reese did. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. The man walking in was no ordinary parent. Elias's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Take your hands off my son. Now." Dalton turned, irritation flashing across his face until he saw who was speaking. There was a pause, a beat of silence that spoke volumes. "Sir, this is an ongoing investigation," Dalton said, straightening, trying to regain control. Elias stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "And I'm watching you violate protocol in real time." Reese stepped back, allowing space to form between Caleb and Dalton. He hadn't unhooked his cuffs. He didn't want to escalate. Carolyn, however, wasn't ready to let go. "I don't care who you are," she snapped, recovering her sharpness. "That boy doesn't belong in this store. You think you can walk in here and scare us with your—" Elias turned to her sharply. He didn't need to say a word. His eyes did it for him. She faltered, words caught in her throat. Because there was something chilling about being faced with a man who could remain calm while dismantling everything you thought you controlled. "I'm Commander Elias Johnson," he said, looking at Dalton and Reese. "United States Navy. Head of Joint Military Operations for this state. And unless you want an investigation launched into excessive force and wrongful accusation, I suggest we take a moment and breathe." Dalton swallowed. He wasn't used to this being spoken to like he was the one under investigation. Reese, wisely, took a step forward. "Sir," he said, addressing Elias with genuine respect, "we haven't reviewed the footage yet." "I was about to suggest." "Good," Elias nodded. "Then let's do that now." Carolyn slammed a manicured hand on the counter. "Why are we taking this so far?" He was acting suspicious. "That's reason enough." Elias turned back to her. "No, ma'am," he said coolly. "What's suspicious is calling the police over a bracelet you dropped, while ignoring the fact that the footage will reveal everything." The room went quiet again. One of the employees, a young woman in her 20s named Emily, glanced at Carolyn and then at Elias. She opened her mouth nervously. We can pull the footage," she said, her voice small but clear. "From the back room." "Then do it," Elias said. Dalton stepped back, reluctantly letting go of Caleb's wrist. The cuffs remained in his hand, but now they looked ridiculous. Empty and desperate. Caleb exhaled slowly. His arms dropped to his sides, but his posture stayed strong. He didn't look at Carolyn. He didn't need to. The control she thought she had was already slipping. 10 minutes passed like hours. The store grew still, customers pretending to browse, but really watching every moment unfold. When Emily returned with the laptop, all eyes turned to the screen. She pressed play. The footage showed Caleb entering the store, head held high, walking straight to the bracelet display. He waited politely, spoke with Carolyn, removed his wallet, counted the money. Everything was clear, deliberate, calm. Then came the moment. The bracelet slipped from his fingers. He reached, missed. It hit the counter, then the floor. He didn't run. He didn't even move toward it. Just stood still. Carolyn's voice came next, though not heard on camera. It played out visually. Her frantic gesturing. Her lunge for the phone. Caleb's shocked reaction. No theft. No attempt. No malice. Just a dropped bracelet and a woman desperate to prove something that never happened. Carolyn's face turned ashen. Dalton stepped back, his jaw clenched. Reese nodded slowly. That's all we needed. Elias folded his arms. So now, Sergeant Dalton, what exactly were you arresting him for? Dalton said nothing. Carolyn tried to step forward again. He looked suspicious. His clothes, his demeanor, he doesn't belong in a place like this. And with that, the last thread of justification unraveled. Elias took a long breath, as if deciding whether to speak or let the silence do its job. But then he looked at his son, Caleb, who had stood there the entire time, dignified and silent, with restraint few adults could match. He deserved words. Elias turned to Carolyn one last time. You judged my son before he even opened his mouth. You lied to law enforcement. And you tried to ruin his life over a bracelet he worked 3 months to buy for his sister. Carolyn tried to protest. I thought. No, Elias said coldly. You assumed. Reese walked over to Dalton. We need to file a report on this. I'll notify the department. Dalton nodded stiffly, his authority completely dismantled. Carolyn stood frozen behind the counter, her power now a memory. And Caleb? He finally picked up the bracelet from the floor gently, like it was something sacred. And as he turned it in the light once more, this time he wasn't just thinking of his sister. He was thinking of truth, of how fragile it is, of how easily it can be stolen not by thieves, but by lies. But this time, truth had won. And this was only the beginning. The footage had spoken. The room was quiet, filled with an uncomfortable tension no one knew how to break. But just as things seemed like they were calming, a small tremor shifted everything again. Caleb stood near the display counter, the bracelet finally back in his hands. He turned it gently in the light, admiring its soft glimmer, the opals reflecting the ambient glow like tiny northern stars. He thought of Alana's smile, the surprise on her face when she'd opened the box. He closed his eyes for a brief second. Then it slipped, just like before. This time, no footage to rescue him. No pause button to rewind. Just a human mistake, unfolding in real time. The bracelet hit the edge of the glass display with a crisp tink, then bounced onto the marble floor with a cold, echoing clink. The sound was small, but in the suffocating silence of the store, it might as well have been an explosion. Carolyn Whitaker snapped to attention. I knew it, she shrieked, lunging forward like a villain revealed in the final act. He's trying to steal it. He's covering for what he was planning all along. Caleb's eyes widened. No, but she didn't let him finish. He was fumbling with it on purpose. This is what they do. Carolyn's voice soared, loud and dramatic, projecting to every customer, every staff member, and more importantly to the 2 officers still present. Officer Reese flinched, startled by the sudden escalation. His eyes flicked toward Caleb, then down to the bracelet now resting innocently on the marble tiles. No cracks, no scratches, but also no evidence of theft. Sergeant Dalton, however, was quicker to respond. That's enough, he growled, stepping forward. I warned you once, kid. I'm not warning you again. I didn't do anything, Caleb said, his voice rising but still steady. He reached toward the bracelet instinctively. Dalton reacted like a coiled spring. Hands where I can see them. The room froze. Caleb's fingers hung in the air just inches above the bracelet, paralyzed. Elias Johnson, still standing a few feet away, raised his voice. Rick, step back. Dalton didn't budge. This kid's playing you, Commander. You think just because he's your son, we're supposed to pretend that didn't happen? Reese moved quickly between them, putting a hand on Dalton's arm. Sergeant, don't escalate this. We just reviewed the footage. We both know there was no intent. He dropped it again. Dalton barked. That's suspicious enough for a second look. Elias stepped forward now, slow and deliberate. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice calm but charged like static. You have no evidence. No theft. No witness to confirm any wrongdoing. Just the fact that my son. He glanced at the bracelet, now once again resting on the floor. Dropped an item. Twice. Carolyn interjected, desperate to regain control. It's not about evidence. It's about instinct. I've been managing this store for 15 years. I know when someone's up to something. Elias turned to her with a sharp gaze. Then your instincts are flawed. Or biased. Possibly both. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but the fire in her eyes hadn't gone out. I'm calling corporate, she muttered. There's no way this goes unreported. You're right, Elias said. It won't go unreported. Just not in the way you think. Dalton finally lowered the cuffs, but reluctantly. His jaw was tight, his fingers twitching. Caleb, still frozen in place, slowly crouched down. His hand reached for the bracelet with deliberate care, as though he was defusing a bomb. He picked it up, held it to his chest, and stood. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, and that was worse. Across the room, a woman in a light blue blouse adjusted her handbag uncomfortably. A man in a dark blazer stepped slightly away from the display shelf. The customers didn't speak, but their silence said enough. They had all made their assumptions, and now, some of them were realizing how wrong they'd been. Elias took another step toward Dalton. You were ready to arrest my son again. Based on nothing. You don't need intent anymore. Just discomfort? Dalton was breathing heavier now, clearly losing composure. You're overreacting. No, Elias said flatly. I'm responding, which is something you clearly never learned to do before deciding to act on instinct. Officer Reese finally cleared his throat. We need to de-escalate. Let's take a breath, all of us. Carolyn pointed again. You're letting him get away with it. Twice now. Reese turned to her. Ma'am, we watched the footage. We're standing right here. We saw it happen. He didn't try to run. He didn't pocket the item. It fell. It always falls when they get caught, she snapped. And that was it. The sentence lingered in the air like poison gas. Even Dalton blinked. Elias stepped forward slowly, dangerously calm. Finish that sentence, he said to Carolyn. Say it out loud. Say what you mean. Carolyn hesitated. She looked around the room at the customers, at the employees, at the officers. No one was standing with her anymore. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, the power she'd held so effortlessly slipped from her grip. I didn't mean anything, she mumbled. But you did, Elias replied. And now everyone here knows exactly what kind of manager you are. Dalton looked down at the cuffs in his hand, then glanced at Officer Reese, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A silent warning. Not this time. Caleb didn't say a word. He simply walked to the counter and placed the bracelet gently back into its velvet cradle. I'm not buying anything today, he said. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit. Elias gave Carolyn one last look, cold and final, before following his son. Just before he pushed open the glass door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. You called the police on a boy because he walked into your store with enough money to buy a bracelet, he said. You called the wrong man's son a thief. And then he was gone. The cold afternoon air swept through the open doors of Silverline Jewelers as Caleb and Commander Elias Johnson stepped out into the Lexington sidewalk, leaving behind a room still stunned by what had just happened. The tension inside was tangible, clinging to the polished floors and mirrored walls like smoke from a fire no one had expected. Caleb exhaled slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elias walked beside him in silence. Both of them, knowing the moment hadn't ended, it had only paused. Because when injustice is rooted deep in the walls of a system, walking out of a building doesn't always mean leaving it behind. And just as they reached the first step down the curb, the wail of sirens returned. They weren't coming for anyone else. Two black and white cruisers screeched to a halt right in front of the store. Doors flew open. This wasn't a quiet check-in. This was a full show of force, complete with adrenaline, miscommunication, and assumption. A third officer jumped out of the passenger side. He was taller than Dalton, late 30s, with a thick bulletproof vest and a face carved from suspicion. His name tag read Lieutenant Brent Mallory. Where's the suspect? He barked to no one in particular. Elias calmly raised his hand. There's no suspect. Situation has been resolved. But Mallory wasn't interested in calm. He scanned the crowd and locked his gaze on Caleb Young, black, still clutching his phone in one hand. You hands where I can see them, he shouted, drawing his taser. Caleb froze. Again. Elias stepped forward, arms spread protectively. Lieutenant, stand down. My son is not. You don't get to give commands here, Mallory interrupted. I don't care who you are. That was the second mistake. The first was arriving with no context. The second was assuming that Elias Johnson, commander of one of the most elite Navy units in the country, would accept disrespect in a moment this volatile. But Elias didn't explode. He didn't raise his voice. He knew the rules of the game. Sergeant Dalton called for backup before reviewing evidence, Elias explained. We have security footage clearing my son. Officer Reese and I both confirmed it. Mallory didn't lower the taser. You interfering with a police operation? I'm protecting my child, Elias said. And I'm informing you that your presence is no longer necessary. More customers had exited the store now, their eyes wide as they watched the confrontation unfold. A mother pulled her daughter close. A man started recording with his phone from across the street. What had begun as a shop visit was becoming a scene. Inside the store, Officer Reese emerged behind the front window, holding up the store laptop like a flag of truth. I've got the video, he shouted. There's no theft. The call was unfounded. But Mallory wasn't listening. Step aside, sir, he ordered Elias, voice hard. We'll handle this now. The door to the second cruiser opened again, and another officer stepped out. Officer Denise Carr, stern-faced, eyes narrowed with the weight of assumption. Elias's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with precision. He reached into his back pocket slowly, calmly, and withdrew a worn leather badge holder. Commander Elias Johnson, he said. U.S. Navy. I suggest you rethink how you're proceeding before you turn this into a civil rights violation. Mallory blinked. It wasn't the badge that shook him. It was the tone. The way Elias said it, not as a threat, but as a promise. Caleb hadn't moved. His hands still hovered near his shoulders, his breathing shallow. Dad, he whispered, I don't want this to happen again. Elias heard it, felt it. The resignation in his son's voice wasn't new. It had been carried in his blood for generations. But hearing it again on the lips of his own child hit harder than anything the system could dish out. Reese finally stepped between them. Lieutenant Mallory, he said firmly, we reviewed the footage. This boy didn't do anything. He didn't even touch the bracelet when it dropped. The call from the manager was based on her assumptions, not evidence. Mallory's shoulders stiffened. He glanced at Carr, who said nothing but didn't holster her weapon either. This wasn't a squad ready to retreat. Carolyn Whitaker appeared in the doorway again, arms crossed, trying to reclaim her false authority. He still dropped it, she snapped. He came in here suspicious, and now everyone's just letting him walk out because his dad showed up? Her voice cut through the siren haze. Elias turned to her, cold and direct. You didn't just accuse my son. You crafted a lie, then doubled down on it in front of law enforcement. Carolyn opened her mouth, but Officer Reese raised a hand. Enough. His voice was louder now, sharper. This isn't how we do things. Not anymore. Mallory finally lowered his taser, but not with any apology. Fine, he muttered. Let's take this inside and file it. But Elias didn't move. No, he said. You're not filing anything until you file a report against your own officers for escalating a false accusation. The silence was absolute. Reese nodded slowly. I'll start that paperwork myself. Mallory didn't like it. But he knew, deep down, this wasn't just another noise complaint or trespassing incident. This was a mistake on record, on camera, and now in public. The crowd across the street had grown. Phones were out. Eyewitnesses were murmuring, capturing everything. Elias placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You okay? He asked. Caleb nodded once, barely. Let's go, Elias said. But Caleb hesitated. He turned to face Mallory, Carr, and Carolyn one last time. His eyes weren't angry, they were exhausted. I just wanted to buy something nice for my little sister, he said. That's all. No one answered, because there was nothing they could say. Elias and Caleb walked away not because they had to, but because the story was no longer about fear. It was about exposure. About what happens when power meets truth and has nowhere left to run. As Caleb and Elias walked away from the chaos outside Silverline Jewelers, the wind shifted. What had started as a quiet act of love, a teenager trying to buy a birthday gift for his sister, had exploded into a full confrontation with law enforcement, systemic bias, and raw injustice. But Caleb didn't feel triumphant. He felt watched. He felt heavy. Even now, as they stepped into the car, Elias opening the passenger door for his son, the feeling of cold eyes pressing down on him hadn't left. The echo of Sergeant Dalton's threats, Carolyn Whitaker's accusations, and Lieutenant Mallory's unholstered taser still rang in his ears. Elias sat in the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he stared out through the windshield at the reflective storefront behind them, Silverline's polished glass now marred by the memory of what had just happened. "You okay?" he asked. Caleb nodded once, but his lips didn't move. His eyes were locked forward, jaw clenched. Elias recognized that silence. It wasn't the kind that followed fear. It was the kind that followed betrayal. "I thought the truth would be enough," Caleb finally whispered. Elias leaned back. "It should have been. But for people like us, the truth isn't the end of the fight. It's the beginning." Caleb turned his head slowly. "What if you hadn't picked up?" Elias's gaze hardened. "Then you'd be in a holding cell right now." And they both knew it was the truth. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, the traffic continued. Life kept moving. But inside that car, something had crystallized, something heavier than anger. It was the realization that in a single moment, their whole life could have been rewritten by one phone call. And that was when Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, not to text, not to scroll, but to dial a number Caleb had never seen him use outside of base. "Who are you calling?" Caleb asked. Elias didn't look at him. "Someone who answers." The phone rang once, twice. Then a gravel-toned voice picked up. "Commander Johnson?" "Colonel," Elias said firmly. "I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." There was a beat of silence. Then the voice came clearer, more alert. "What happened?" Elias's tone didn't change. "Two of your officers, Sergeant Rick Dalton and Lieutenant Brent Mallory, responded to a theft call at Silverline Jewelers today. My son was falsely accused by the store manager. The accusation was entirely unfounded. Surveillance footage proves it. Yet they proceeded to treat him as a criminal before reviewing evidence. Drew weapons. Reached for cuffs. No questions. No due process." The line went quiet again. "Then, your son's okay?" "Because I arrived in time," Elias said. "But that's not good enough. We both know how differently this could have ended." The voice on the other end grew graver. "What do you need from me?" "I need an internal review opened immediately," Elias said. "I need every report filed by Sergeant Dalton and Lieutenant Mallory in the past 6 months pulled and audited. I need Silverline Jewelers manager Carolyn Whitaker interviewed under oath. And I need your office to make a statement. Publicly. This won't just disappear." There was no hesitation now. "You'll have it," the colonel said. Elias ended the call without ceremony. Then he turned to Caleb. "I'm not just fighting for you," he said. "I'm fighting for the kids whose parents can't make that phone call. The ones who walk in alone and never walk back out the same." Caleb stared at his father, really looked at him for the first time in hours. He saw it now, the weight his father carried, the long game he was playing, not for glory, but for survival. It wasn't about a bracelet anymore. It was about the right to be seen as innocent until proven otherwise. Caleb exhaled slowly. "So what happens next?" "We make it official," Elias said. "And we make it public." Back inside the store, the atmosphere had turned toxic for Carolyn Whitaker. Her once commanding presence had all but evaporated. Customers had thinned out. Staff whispered behind the counters. And Officer Reese, now sitting behind a laptop at the store's small consultation desk, was already typing up his statement. Margaret stood with her arms tightly folded, like a fortress under siege. Dalton was pacing silently, his face flushed with embarrassment masked as frustration. He knew. Deep down, he knew this was over for him. Reese looked up. "The footage is being logged and sent to Internal Affairs," he said. "And the incident reports being flagged for review." Dalton scoffed. "Based on what?" "A dropped bracelet." Reese didn't look up. "Based on a pattern. And your response to it." Outside, Elias and Caleb had returned not as suspects, not as victims, but as witnesses. Elias stepped back through the glass door, and this time, the room didn't ignore him. He wasn't a parent interrupting protocol. He was the reason protocol was finally being followed. Reese stood. "Commander, the colonel has already called back. I've been instructed to submit my full report by end of shift. IA will follow up within 24 hours. Elias nodded once. "Good." Caleb stayed close to the door, watching. He didn't need to speak anymore. His silence was a statement on its own. Carolyn tried to regain footing. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," Elias said, voice firm but measured. "You called the police on a teenager for dropping something. You escalated when the truth didn't match your assumption. And you nearly destroyed someone's future because your instincts mattered more than facts." She tried to respond, but the words came out hollow. I was just doing my job. Elias stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. No, he said. You were abusing your power, and now you're going to answer for it. He turned to Reese. We're done here. The officer gave a slight nod. Caleb and Elias left the store for the second and final time. This time, the door didn't slam behind them. It just closed gently, as if even the building was ashamed of what had happened inside. They walked in silence toward the car. But before Elias opened the door, he placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You're going to remember this day for the rest of your life, he said. But so will they. And next time when it's someone else, it won't happen without consequence. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to, because this time, the truth didn't get buried. It got broadcast. The sun had started to dip behind the skyline of Lexington, casting a golden hue across the marble floors of Silverline Jewelers. Inside, the once pristine atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavier. The scent of polished glass and designer perfume couldn't cover the tension pulsing beneath every breath. Officer Reese sat behind the consultation counter, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he compiled a comprehensive incident report. Across the room, Carolyn Whitaker stood stiffly behind the main register, her arms crossed tightly, her confidence thinning by the second. The once assured tone in her voice had vanished, replaced by a pinched silence. Just behind her, Sergeant Rick Dalton leaned against the wall with his arms folded, his jaw clenched, and eyes staring blankly at the tiled floor. A career law enforcer now trying to make sense of how quickly his standard response had unraveled. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because now the truth, the real truth, was about to be seen. Not imagined. Not manipulated. But played back in the harsh clarity of surveillance footage. Ready, said Reese, clicking on the final clip. He turned the screen slightly, so both Dalton and Carolyn could see. There it was. Caleb Johnson, 17, walking into the store with his head high, stepping toward the bracelet display with a purpose in his eyes and savings in his wallet. They saw him politely ask for help. Saw him wait. Saw him pull out carefully stacked cash. They saw Carolyn eye him. They saw her body language shift. Her expression tighten. Her arms cross. Her steps slow. They saw her speak, but not with warmth, only with judgment. And they saw the bracelet. How it glimmered under the showroom lights. How Caleb gently picked it up. How it slipped an honest accident, bouncing off the edge of the glass counter and landing on the floor. Then, her reaction. Carolyn's voice, though muted by the footage, could be read in her frantic movements, flailing arms, wide eyes, a lunge for the phone. They saw Caleb freeze. Hands in the air. No pocketing. No running. No guilt. Just confusion. And then fear. A stillness swept over the room as the final moments played. The footage showed Elias Johnson entering the store calm, silent, unshakable. His posture spoke louder than any raised voice. And it captured the moment. The dynamic changed the exact second Carolyn's story started to unravel. Reese paused the video. I'm submitting this to the Internal Affairs Division in full, he said quietly. There's no interpretation needed. It speaks for itself. Dalton muttered under his breath, something indecipherable, his eyes still not meeting anyone else's. Carolyn, however, was not ready to back down. It doesn't show what I felt, she said, her voice strained. He had an energy. He was tense, defensive. That tells you something. Reese turned toward her, deadpan. You made a criminal accusation, not a psychic reading. He was acting suspicious, she insisted. Reese nodded slowly. And yet, he didn't take a thing. He didn't touch anything that didn't belong to him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. You did. The room was silent again. But the silence was no longer awkward. It was damning. From the far corner, a young employee, Emily, the associate who had stood silently during the confrontation, finally stepped forward. I saw it too, she said. I saw everything. He didn't steal anything. And I thought we were supposed to serve everyone. Carolyn turned toward her with sharp eyes. You're a part-time employee. Emily didn't flinch. So are most of the people who will watch this video when it goes public. Reese cleared his throat and stood. I've been doing this job for a long time, he said. I've seen real theft. Real intent. This wasn't that. This was prejudice dressed up as professionalism. And I'm not signing my name onto it. Dalton shook his head slowly, standing away from the wall. We made a call based on a store manager's statement, he said defensively. You made a call without asking a single question, Elias said, stepping forward from the back of the store where he'd re-entered minutes ago. Dalton finally looked up. You came in here trying to flex. Because you wear a uniform. Elias didn't blink. No, Sergeant. I came in here because I've buried too many young men who never got to finish high school, never mind buy their sister a birthday gift. I came in here because I won't let my son become another name on a list you forget next week. Dalton fell silent. Then Elias turned toward Carolyn. You said you had instincts. That your years of experience told you my son was up to something. Let me tell you what I see. He stepped closer. His voice dropped into something colder, something that cut. I see a woman so used to being in control, she thinks her word can rewrite reality. I see someone who confused gut feeling with bias. And worst of all, I see someone who almost ruined a child's life over a dropped bracelet. Carolyn opened her mouth, but said nothing. Reese spoke again. I've sent a summary to headquarters. Lieutenant Mallory has also been notified that his conduct will be reviewed. Officer Carr, too. Elias folded his arms. And what about her? Carolyn bristled. Reese hesitated for only a moment. Corporate will handle the employment side, but my report will include a recommendation for investigation into filing a false police report. Emily, the young associate, quietly added, she's done it before. All eyes turned to her. What do you mean? Reese asked. She's called the cops on other customers, Emily said. Usually younger ones. Usually, black or Hispanic. Always said they looked nervous or were loitering. But nothing ever happened. They never stole anything. And they never came back. That was it. The final crack. Reese turned to Carolyn. You didn't just make a mistake. You followed a pattern. And that's no longer just prejudice. That's misconduct. Carolyn slumped back, as if the words themselves carried physical weight. Dalton stepped forward. You're ruining careers here. Over a misunderstanding. Elias's eyes narrowed. What you call a misunderstanding, we call a memory that never fades. A trauma that never goes away. A reputation that almost shattered. Caleb didn't misunderstand anything. He lived it. No one answered. Because what could they say? Caleb reappeared near the door. He'd heard most of it. He walked back to the counter one last time, looked at the bracelet sitting where it all started. Then, he looked up at Carolyn. I saved every dollar for this, he said. Not because I wanted your approval, but because I thought my sister deserved something beautiful. Carolyn looked away. But maybe, Caleb added, what she really deserved was a brother who knows when to walk away. He turned and exited the store without another word. Elias followed, pausing at the doorway. Make sure the footage doesn't disappear, he said to Reese. Because the truth doesn't erase what happened, but it can stop it from happening again. Reese nodded. It's already been backed up to the cloud. Elias stepped outside, letting the glass door swing shut behind him. This time, it didn't feel like an exit. It felt like a line being drawn. The next morning, the city of Lexington woke up to more than just coffee and morning traffic. It woke up to a video just under 2 minutes long that had already racked up 67,000 views before 10 a.m. A teenage boy, a silver bracelet, a store manager shouting, police officers drawing weapons, and finally, a calm, authoritative black man stepping in to dismantle a lie so carefully constructed it had almost become truth. The title of the video read, Navy Commander Defends Son from Racial Profiling at Jewelry Store, Entire Incident Caught on Camera. By noon, local news outlets were covering it. By 3 p.m., it had been shared by multiple national pages. Hashtag Justice for Caleb was trending on X. And by evening, Silverline Jewelers' corporate office was in full damage control mode. Back inside the downtown Lexington location, the atmosphere had changed completely. Gone were the confident stares, the smug professionalism. Every employee kept their head down. Customers walked in quietly and walked out even quicker. In the center of it all stood Carolyn Whitaker, the woman who had once ruled this store like a private kingdom. Now, she barely held eye contact with anyone. She had received 3 calls from corporate by noon. The fourth one came at 2:17 p.m. Carolyn, the voice on the other end, said, The regional director will be flying in tomorrow. Until then, we're placing you on temporary leave effective immediately. Her lips trembled. But we've seen the footage, the voice interrupted. You're to leave the premises immediately. And do not speak to the media. At all. The line went dead. The world she'd built, status, control, authority, was crumbling. She turned to Emily, the associate who had spoken out the day before. and tried to salvage whatever shred of image she had left. "This isn't the end of this," Carolyn muttered. But Emily didn't even respond. She simply stepped aside and let her pass. Outside the store, the street was different now. A small group had gathered on the sidewalk, holding signs that read, "Your bias could kill someone. Caleb could have been me." Racism isn't customer service. They weren't violent. They weren't disruptive. They were visible, and that, for the first time, was more powerful than anything else. Across town, inside a sleek government office building, Commander Elias Johnson sat across from Colonel Frank O'Connell, head of the Lexington Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit. The mood in the room wasn't casual. Frank leaned back in his chair, his gruff voice edged with frustration, but not toward Elias. 2 years, Frank said. 2 years I've been trying to clean up this department's culture, and one call from a jewelry store almost sends it all crashing down. Elias remained calm. It didn't almost. It did. Frank sighed. Dalton's been with us for 18 years. Decorated. Commended. But I'll be honest, he's always walked a tightrope. Power without reflection. And what about Mallory? Elias asked, his voice steady. Transferred from Memphis. We've had 3 complaints filed against him in the past 6 months, none escalated until now. But this isn't just an escalation. This is national. Elias leaned forward. I want it on the record that my son did nothing wrong. And I want a written apology from the department signed by both Dalton and Mallory. Frank met his gaze. You'll have it. And I want more than that, Elias added. I want a mandatory training reform. Bias training. De-escalation training. You want this department to evolve. Start with the officers who almost pulled a taser on a kid holding a gift for his sister. Frank nodded slowly. You know how hard that's going to be? Elias didn't flinch. You know how easy it is to bury someone like Caleb? Silence fell over the room. Then Frank pulled out a folder. Blake Mallory has been suspended. Dalton has been placed under formal review. We've opened all prior complaints. And we're sending an official investigator to Silverline Jewelers tomorrow. Elias exhaled. Not in relief, just acknowledgement. The system only works when people inside it stop protecting it from the truth, he said. Frank nodded. And people like you make it harder for us to ignore that truth. Back at home, Caleb sat on the front steps of their house, his eyes scanning the hundreds of messages flooding his phone. Some were encouraging, some were heartbreaking, some were just angry. A DM from a boy in Detroit read, Man, this happened to me at the mall last summer. They said I looked suspicious and followed me out of the Nike store. I didn't say anything. I just left. Wish I had someone like your dad. Another message from a girl in Georgia. My mom cried watching your video. She said you were brave. Thank you for showing us we don't have to stay quiet. Caleb's thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't feel brave. Not really. He felt seen. And that, for the first time, wasn't terrifying. It was liberating. Elias walked outside and handed him a glass of lemonade. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky orange and purple. They called, Elias said. Caleb looked up. Who? Internal Affairs. They're launching a full probe. Corporate at Silverline issued a public apology. Caleb blinked. Public? Elias nodded. It's already on their website. He handed over a printout from his office inbox. The statement read, We deeply regret the incident that occurred at our Lexington location. Silverline Jewelers condemns all forms of racial profiling and discrimination. We are taking immediate steps to retrain our staff and cooperate fully with the investigation. We extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Caleb Johnson and his family. Caleb stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a triumphant smile. It was the soft, weathered smile of someone who had survived a storm and seen what remained after it passed. Elias sat beside him. You didn't back down, he said. That matters. Caleb exhaled, looking up at the sky. I just didn't want to feel helpless again. You weren't helpless, Elias replied. You were targeted. But you weren't alone. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind through the trees. Then Caleb spoke again. Do you think people like Carolyn will ever change? Elias thought carefully. No, he said. But the world around them can. And that's where change begins. Across the city, in a dimly lit apartment, Carolyn sat with her television muted. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Emails, calls, news clips. Shame wrapped around her like a weighted blanket she couldn't throw off. Her career? Damaged. Her reputation? Publicly shattered. But most of all, something she had never expected had happened. She'd been seen not as the gatekeeper, but as the villain. And there was no one left to defend her. No police. No coworkers. No corporate lifeline. Just a screen showing her own reflection and the world's judgment staring back. 3 days after the incident at Silverline Jewelers, Caleb Johnson stood outside his sister's bedroom door holding a small, neatly wrapped box. The gift had been reboxed new ribbon, fresh card, a quiet message handwritten in pen. For the brightest girl I know. Love, your big brother. He hesitated for a moment, fingers tightening around the edge of the box, then gently knocked. Come in. Alana's voice rang from the other side. Caleb opened the door and saw her sitting cross-legged on the bed, a huge smile spreading across her face the moment she saw him. You remembered, she squealed. I always remember, he said, chuckling softly. But this time, it took a little more to get here. She tilted her head. What do you mean? Caleb just smiled and handed her the box. Open it. Alana tore through the paper with the giddy precision of a kid who had waited all year for this. When the lid came off and the silver bracelet caught the light, her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as she held it up. Oh my gosh, Caleb, this is gorgeous. He nodded, his voice quieter now. I thought it looked like you. She looked up. Is something wrong? He hesitated. For a moment, flashes of that day came back. Carolyn's scream, the cold feel of suspicion, the drawn taser, the whispering customers, the tight grip of injustice. But he shook them off. I just want you to know, he said softly. This bracelet isn't just a gift. It's a reminder. Alana blinked. Of what? That sometimes, he said, you can do everything right and still be treated wrong. But that doesn't make you less. It doesn't make you guilty. And it definitely doesn't make you powerless. She nodded slowly, eyes wide. Thanks, she whispered, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. I love it. And I love you. Caleb smiled, but behind it sat a deeper truth, one he hadn't spoken out loud yet, but had been thinking about every night since. That evening, as the house quieted and the streetlights outside buzzed to life, Caleb sat on the porch steps next to his father, Commander Elias Johnson, both of them sipping root beer and watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. Neither spoke for a while. Then Caleb broke the silence. Dad, why did you fight so hard that day? You've dealt with worse, right? You've seen worse. Elias turned to him, his eyes steady. Because I couldn't let it become your normal. He took a slow breath before continuing. There's something they don't tell you when you become a father, especially a black father in this country. They don't tell you that you'll wake up every day knowing the world won't always see your child the way you do. And that one day, that child will have to stand alone. So you teach him early. You teach him how to stand without bowing, how to speak without shouting, and how to survive without surrendering. Caleb listened in silence. I fought that day, Elias said, because I've seen what happens when no one steps in. And I promised your mother before she passed I'd never let you fight alone. Caleb swallowed hard. Do you think I did the right thing? Even dropping the bracelet, everything after that? Elias turned, his voice warm but firm. You did what men do, son. You stood your ground without losing your dignity. You walked away with truth, not revenge. That's strength. Caleb nodded. A long silence followed, but this one wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, sacred, like 2 generations sealing a covenant between them. Meanwhile, across town, the corporate board of Silverline Jewelers had issued a second, more detailed statement. Carolyn Whitaker's employment had been terminated. Her actions were described as a gross violation of company values, and an internal audit was launched into her past customer incidents. Multiple previous victims came forward. Complaints that had been dismissed before were now being reviewed in full light of day. Silverline publicly pledged to implement mandatory racial bias training across all stores by year-end, and they named the program after Caleb Johnson. Project Calm, Caleb's act for lasting mindfulness. Across social media, the response was overwhelming. Some people were angry it took this long. Others were inspired. But the conversation had changed. No longer was Caleb just a headline, that he was a reminder. In a quiet neighborhood, Caleb sat at his desk that night, laptop open. He began typing slowly, then faster. It wasn't a post. It wasn't a rant. It was a letter. A message. To everyone who's ever been seen as a threat before being seen as a person. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to prove your worth when it's already in you. And even if the world tries to rewrite your story, You get to hold the pen that I'm not here to be your hero. I'm just one voice saying, you're not alone. Keep walking. Keep standing. And when the time comes, make sure you're the one who picks up the phone. He hit send. The next morning, Caleb walked past Silverline Jewelers not to buy, not to confront, but simply to exist. He glanced at the window display. New employees were inside. The manager's desk was empty. People on the street nodded at him, strangers who had seen the story. Some smiled. Some just stared. But one thing was certain. He was no longer invisible, not because of fame, but because truth, once seen, can't be unseen. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand quietly while the truth does the talking. Caleb Johnson didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he refused to be erased. And in a world where one assumption can ruin a life, his story became a line drawn in stone. Enough.